say hello. Lori can say hello.
I'm Lori Brown.
And so we are doing this Ask Me Anything session relating to what's going on with our scientific organization, American Chemical Society, and human rights issues. So I'm going to give you just a little intro. And before I do that, so I won't go through this whole thing and not say that in addition to Lori and I from the American Chemical Society is also Dr. Thomas Connolly, who is our CEO and Executive Director. So Tom, you want to say hello?
Oh, okay. Hello. Thanks, Dorothy. Thanks for the introduction.
So anyway, we're here. So just to say, the slide gives my role as far as the ACS is concerned. I'm their board of directors as a director at large. And for the coalition, I am the AAAS Science Human Rights Coalition. I'm on their steering committee and the council. So Laura, you want to tell, and I think this is my seventh year on both the board and the Science and Human Rights Coalition, participating in the Science and Human Rights Coalition. Yeah. So Laura, you want to just say a little bit?
Sure. Hi everyone. My name is Lori Brown. I'm a senior manager for global outreach in the External Affairs and Communications Office at the American Chemical Society. I have been working with Dorothy on the staff side of the ACS's science and human rights efforts for just about the same length of time, about 6-7 years. And have been quite involved with the AAAS Science and Rights Coalition as well. So glad to be here, and thank you to Jessica and AAAS for having us host this session. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, Jessica, we thank you for joining us as well. Just say a little bit about the ACS, so in case we did this yesterday, but if you weren't in the session, we'll just come back and do it again. So the American Chemical Society was founded in 1876 and chartered by the U.S. Congress. It is one of the world's largest scientific organizations, and I'll give some numbers later. Our vision is improving people's lives through the transforming power of chemistry, and our mission is to advancing the broader chemistry enterprise and its practitioners for the benefit of Earth and its people. And now just a few numbers about the American Chemical Society. So the 11,000 is the high school students who are have participated over the years, a 50-year program, Project Seed, for low-income students, and that's one of the things we have. Have publications also. More than 8,700 articles that have been authored, and some by chemistry Nobel laureates. And I'm very proud that we have 2 women chemistry Nobel laureates, and one of them has definitely worked with our American Chemical Society. In 2018, our journal articles were cited more than 3.4 million times and downloaded over 130 million times. And the CAS has over 150 million unique chemical substances in its registry, which identifies and aggregates chemical substances information. So it's the largest world curated database of chemical substances. Now we also have, the second half of this has more than 152,000 members and over 140 countries, which means we are global. And in order to facilitate the interaction between our members, geographically, we have 180 US local sections internationally, more than 20 international chapters, and we have 32 technical divisions. These divisions connect members to the people and information they need to advance their respective fields of chemistry. Okay, next slide. Just kind of where we began with this, long before I think Laura, I was involved, we began to monitor violations of human rights in the 1980s. And it was brought in 2011, I believe, the ACS Board of Directors of the program was brought to that level. Case monitoring is where we really got started with this, and it's a major part of the program. But we do other things as well, webinars, symposia, work with allied science and human rights organizations. So it's a pretty broad program that we have. So a big part of this, and you'll see also if you go to our website, some of the history and the case monitoring. That is really amazing. These are professors who are mostly chemists or chemical engineering background, whose rights have been abridged, often for political reasons, by reasons within their country or geographical area. We are involved in the Science and Human Rights Coalition. The other area is publications, outreach, and events. So we'll go to the next slide. So we are a founding member of the coalition starting in 2009, and we were all really happy to celebrate the 10th year anniversary with a program that we could be in person with in this particular time in October. Some of the contributions are the development of the primer on scientific freedom and human rights. We have featured the coalition in some of our webinars and at conferences. And as I mentioned earlier, we're members of the steering committee and the council. Okay, almost done. A book that I would actually recommend is the Responsible Conduct in Chemistry Research and Practices, a Global Perspective, where we have a chapter. So you can see that or not, but we have a chapter in here. And so maybe that's interested in reading some more details. We've also I've read several CNN comments over the years. We've had symposia at our national meetings, and we have a dedicated science and human rights column in the ACS Global Chemistry newsletter. Webinars, I think we mentioned just a couple here. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, Scholars at Risk, and Physicians for Human Rights. So we are trying to bring more information, especially to our own members, but to the general public in this area of science and human rights by having the webinars. Okay. Yesterday, I just mentioned yesterday, we had the Physical Sciences, Human Rights, and the Sustainable Development Goals was the workshop that we had yesterday afternoon. One more slide, we should be done. Yeah, and so ACS has put an emphasis on these 7 goals, and we picked 3 of them for our workshop yesterday. Good health and well-being, number 3, number 7, and number 13, climate action. So I think that ends our formal presentation. And now we'll open the floor to your questions, because this is Ask Me Anything. So Laura and I, and sometimes maybe we'll have to call on top, but feel free to put your cameras on and ask us questions. And we'll look at the chat, see if we have anything in our chat. I see names I recognize, but faces not there, so.
Kimberly, I see that you've unmuted your microphone. If you have a question or a comment.
Yes, thank you, Lori. Thank you, Dorothy, for the presentation. I was just wondering if you might explain a bit more about where this work sits with regards to the leadership and the governance of your association. So are there committees that have human rights as their main goal, or is it folded into the work of a working group or a task force? How does it work, and what does it look like in the structure?
Well, I'll try. I think Laura's even better than I am on this one, but it really started as part of our International Activities Committee, and it was mostly there. And then as we began to expand some of the program, we brought it to the level of the board of directors. And so therefore we needed a board member as a liaison, which it happened just before I came on the board. So maybe 2011, I came on the board in 2014. So it does, but we do have quite a bit of interaction with staff and back to the international, because the staff, it's Lori's role as a member of the staff of ACS, helps with whatever we try, like we work together. So there is a person that's there on staff to help work with me on things, and we expand as we need. Yesterday, we had another member of the executive leadership team, Mary Kershaw, with us, another member of the external and I'm trying to say the names, and communications, right? External communications and affairs. Did I say that right? Karen worked with us on that. So it depends on what that effort is. And the International Activities Committee still may have a project that can be related to this as well. So so it is and Tom has attended most of the AAAS Science and Human Rights Coalition as well. So we do it pretty much from the top down. I don't want to say top down, but from the top, as well as involvement. But if it's something that really needs to do a lot of programming effort, we can come back into our governance organization with something like the International Activities Committee. But for the most part, Lori and I will work together and bring it forward.
Thank you.
Answer? Okay. I saw a question come up in chat, which I should read. Said more about what motivates the society to take an interest in human rights originally. Wow. And there's one name that really comes to mind, and that's Zafar Lerman, who Israel originally, is she Israeli originally? Had a real interest in this area. And I was trying to think of the case. It was really along the lines of abridgment of the rights of scientists. And she got involved in that area. And Lori, I'm gonna let you say more because you have that history better than I do.
Yeah. So my understanding is because this was long before my time at ACS. But I believe in the 80s, what prompted ACS to start getting involved in issues of science and human rights, specifically in casework, scientists having their rights abridged. I think it was mostly based around sort of scientists coming from the Soviet Union that were either being persecuted for political activity in various Soviet countries, or that were trying to get out and that sort of thing. So the ACS got involved initially, and most of the cases at that point were based around scientists from the Soviet Union. After the end of the Cold War, that kind of evolved, and after ACS had kind of started to get involved in these issues, we realized that that there are instances of rights abridgment beyond outside of just the Cold War setting. So in the last several years, for example, we've been monitoring closely the situation in Turkey. The Turkish government has been quite what's the word I'm looking for? Restrictive of academic expression and freedom. There have been lots of professors that have been dismissed and that sort of thing. This is something that's been talked about a lot in the AAAS coalition, I know. So we've monitored that. We've tried to follow cases and speak up for chemical science related professionals from that background. So some other places that we've weighed in on in the last few years. There have been others from, say, the Middle East. We will generally try to help some of the organizations that will place displaced scientists, like Scholars at Risk or Scholars Rescue Fund. When we hear about professors that have chemical science related backgrounds, we will try to reach out to ACS members through some of our newsletters and things like that to see if there are any interested hosts for those visiting scholars. And actually, I think that I would just add that you've probably heard me mention chemical science related professionals in terms of the cases. So I will say that that is something that ACS kind of restricts in terms of our activities with these cases. Is we only really work with cases that are related to that have some sort of connection to the chemical sciences. So chemists, chemical engineers. We've been active or explored cases with science journalists and things like that before. So that's it kind of narrows and limits some of our activities, but we're not a human rights organization. We only have one staff person, me, that's really working on this, and this is just part of my portfolio. So unfortunately, we're not able to devote more time to it, but that's as much as we can do. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Do you have any other questions or comments?
Hi, this is Amanda again. I asked a question about the last question you just answered. I'm the director of the Kentucky Academy of Science. We're a statewide organization and disciplinary, and we have counterparts in almost every state. So I have some communication with 40 other colleagues in different places, and so I'm wondering, international instances are not really within our scope, but I'm wondering, like, are you aware of, we all seem to be aware of like some domestic instances where scientists are having their rights abridged. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you want to speak at all to places where that might be happening in governmental institutions or in academic institutions, and like if there's a role for a state level organization or like regional organizations.
We had an interesting situation last year with a domestic professor who went back to Turkey and couldn't get back. So that was kind of like both ends. And we heard it through the US connection of his university that brought it to our attention. So it actually came from more or less like in the States, making us aware of a situation. So I think that sometimes if you may have that type of a link, that someone in your area or one of the states may have a link to that. The other point of getting involved is when like Scholars at Risk and it's another organization, bring professors here to relocate them because they are at risk. And then that's helping them to get settled in the United States. And that's a big need. Last year we had someone, I think that was pretty nearby, and we'd hoped to get them to an ACS meeting because they came here and they had lost all their connections to the scientific community before being placed. And they were really struggling to build back a network. And of course, funding is limited. So that's another place they need is funding. But this person was located in proximity to what would have been a national meeting if we had not had the pandemic. And so we could have brought him in to have some networking and activities. So I can see working with an organization like Scholars at Risk. And Laura, the other one that I'm thinking of that...
Scholars Rescue Fund is the other organization that, so Scholars at Risk and Scholars Rescue Fund both will help displaced scientists or at-risk scientists, so people that are either being persecuted because of their studies or because of political affiliation or many other reasons. So they're always looking for different partner organizations. Amanda, I'd also say if you're with the Kentucky Academy of Science, I don't know if you saw Rebecca Everly in the plenary session, but the National Academies have a really active and vibrant human rights committee. And in fact, they're a really big resource for us in terms of letting us know when there are cases that are related to the chemical sciences that we should get active on. And so I'd maybe recommend reaching out to her or some of those folks too. So there's two suggestions for you from Dorothy's part about looking for hosting with Scholars at Risk and Scholars Rescue Fund, and then touching base with the national academies to see if they've got suggestions for how the state level academies can get active.
Laurie, could I just add a thought as well?
Yeah, please.
I mean, Dorothy may have mentioned it in her overview, but it was brief. Something that the ACS has done is host a webinar series on the connection between chemistry and human rights. And so while scientific societies that have got involved in human rights have generally started with a focus on persecuted scientists, many, and the ACS is a great example of this, have expanded. And so something you could potentially think about as a state-based academy is how you might be able to start creating relationships, and then from relationships, potentially collaborations between members of your academy and groups on the ground that need the expertise or would benefit from the expertise of your members. As AAAS, we have a volunteer program where we make those kinds of matches, and we're multidisciplinary like you are. And so it's quite possible that there would be a need that could be matched by the expertise of your members. So that's another way of thinking about the application of the disciplines of your members to the needs of your state.
Yeah. Great suggestion. Thank you, Jessica.
Other questions?
Hi, this is Michelle Kinzer from the American Association of Geographers. I'm the government relations manager here, and I have been working on issues related to academic integrity and human rights recently as well. And I'm wondering, you know, aside, not all of these cases always have such a obvious conclusion, or, you know, oftentimes don't have a great ending. And I'm wondering how you measure success as far as, you know, what your members, I suppose, see as success, because I'm always thinking about, you know, I'd love to see how many of our members are engaging on a certain issue, and maybe I could call that a measure of success, but maybe that's not always the best measure. So I wanted your perspective on that.
That's probably the toughest piece, is what is success? What we do when we hear about someone's rights is being abridged, we think of how can we touch base with the country, the ambassador, or someone who could perhaps speak or step in and help that person. And so what we do is go to, like I mentioned earlier, and you'll see that our Dr. Conley is also our executive director, and we work to get, and we have a president of our society, to get a set of letters drafted that can be sent to people who can impact that person who's either in prison or scheduled to go to prison, and we try to intervene that way. Now, it's not a short process, because we got some people that we have been monitoring since I came on board, and we may make a little progress when we get them out of prison and back in their home. You know, most success I can think recently was the professor I mentioned who was from the US, went to Turkey, and he's now back home. But letters had to be written to him. So we measure it in steps. We can get the Department of State or someone to include a report of that person. But it's seldom that we can totally turn it around in a short period of time. The other thing we do also is to get our members. We can take that at one of our national meetings, go into, set up a booth and get our members to write letters also in support of that person. So, and I think there was one case last year we changed our mind, but we happened to be in Bahrain, and we were going to see if we could connect with this family, a person we had been following. And the intelligence we got was, don't do that. So we didn't visit that person or try to do anything, but his family had been really pushing for him to get relief. So Michelle, it's hard to give you a crisp answer, and I'm going to turn it over to Laurie too, but we try to make sure the best we do always, and we feel good when we have elevated it, made the powers that be aware that that person is having those rights abuse. Now we can get in with Scholars at Risk, our Scholars Rescue Fund, see if they can then get involved and actually get that person out. I work to get that person back in a safe setting. And one safe setting is not always the end, because once they are at the awareness of the government, of the political organization, I want to say the term picked on, but they are being monitored too. So, and a lot of times sometimes it's very, the person doesn't realize what they've done really, because they're doing their research and it has a political vent, and it gets realized that, hey, this is not following what the government's opinion is. So then they can't travel. They may get their passport taken. So it's sometimes a elevation, gradual elevation of the person. And we're working trying to pull back so they can get back in, be able to practice their science, communicate their science, and hopefully in some cases just be at home. So Lori, did I give enough of an answer there?
Yeah, no. But Dorothy, I think that you touched on pretty much everything. I just add a couple of things here. So so one thing about our case outreach is that we generally try to work more directly and kind of behind the scenes with government officials, with officials from the U.S. State Department for the respective country of the case, and things like that, because it really depends on what the wishes are of the family, and you also have to kind of consider if you start sort of making a case public, what the impact is going to be on the person who is being monitored, who's the subject of the case. So that's always an important consideration, because we don't want to make things worse for that person. So there have been times when yes, if there is a scientist that is the subject of a major sort of international effort from other human rights organizations. So for example, there was an Iranian scientist, a young man who was from Iran but had been studying in the United States, and he had gone back and then was subsequently arrested. I think that he was a nuclear physicist maybe, and they were wanting him to commit to working for the government, and he didn't want to. I think that was the sequence of events, but there was a major campaign around him, and so we definitely encouraged members in person at some of our meetings to sign letters on his behalf, that sort of thing. But otherwise, in terms of measuring success, Dorothy's right. It can be just incremental things over years before you're able to really see any sort of progress. And sometimes it's hard to really see really see what that or really recognize that because of an action that you took, that was the result of the person being released. But one example that I think of that's always for me kind of the best case scenario for us was there was a former chemistry professor from Turkey who is I think president of the Turkish Academy for a while, who had been unfairly arrested and was being detained, and he was in sort of this legal limbo for many years, and had been jailed, and he was in jail, out of jail, this sort of thing, and it was just sort of dragging on, and he wasn't able to work, wasn't able to do all these things. We started getting involved and met with State Department officials from the Turkey desk, and sent them information and kind of kept them updated on information as we received it. And that resulted in him being called out specifically in the human rights report from the State Department in their Turkey section that year. So State Department does a big human rights report, talks about every country, And with some countries that have particularly egregious human rights records, will actually mention specific cases. They actually mentioned him, called him out by name. And then it was, I don't know if it was later that year, if it was the next year, but he ended up getting released from jail. He could go home, he could be with his family again. And I think that the charges ended up being sort of subsequently dropped, or they sort of petered out. So that was the sort of thing where, you know, we can't say that was definitely us. I'm sure that there were many people that were speaking up on his behalf, many organizations, but that's sort of, I think, the biggest victory in my time working in this area for ACS that I've seen. So in terms of measuring success when it comes to the cases, you kind of have to have a lot of patience and faith, I think, to see it through for the long term.
Yeah, Lori, if I could make just one comment, because I think that's absolutely right, but I would simply add that from the standpoint of our members, they understand the reality of working on cases such as this, and I think they are appreciative of the efforts that we make. We don't have sources of power that can really break these things free, but I think they appreciate the level of interest in that we do take, and also our persistence, because it's been said, these play out over a long period of times. And as Dorothy said, we tend to continue to follow these cases. We don't just write a letter and then forget about it. We stick with them. And I think our membership appreciates that fact. And for a certain number of our members, they may have contacts in a certain part of the world or not, but they do follow these cases, and we do, Lori's team and others get very active and stay active on these.
I will mention one other one, because I was thinking about the work with the AAAS Science Human Rights Coalition. The Turkey situation was very big, and so we actually formed a team, project team within the coalition, and so there were several people involved to get and met and talked, because that was across a broad spectrum of the academic community. And we didn't just have chemistry, there were geographers, mathematicians, and those different organizations, associations that were part of the coalition came together to work on that and to try to see what we could do to impact. And it was very difficult, because I called someone in the States and they wouldn't talk, because they knew that there was a long arm for the Turkey government. And they could be here doing fine, but if they heard that they spoke up at all in this, then they could get to the attention, and maybe they never get home again. So that was one of the bigger efforts, involving quite a number of people at one time. I don't have those numbers top of mind, but and we made some trips to New York to talk to scholars at risk about it. Made several efforts to try to see what we could do to specifically understand what was happening to ACS members in Turkey. Were we able to do anything for our members that were there and whose rights were being abridged in that particular situation? So that is another thing, with ACS being worldwide and having international chapters, we can have members in different parts of the world who can be impacted. And it's good, if we don't be even successful, for them to know that their parent association has their interests at heart. So that's what we're trying to make them aware, that we were trying to get that type of intelligence.
Yeah, I think it's important to just sort of piggyback off of what Tom was saying, like in terms of measuring success and informing our members of what we're doing. We try to get the word out just in general about the casework that we do, but also for us, it's a matter of just raising or trying to have dialogues and provide information about the connection between human rights and the work that our members do. So the workshop that we had yesterday was kind of a similar exercise in that, I think, with trying to bridge bridge the divide, which I don't really think there's a divide. They're all interconnected, but between technical solutions and the barriers to those solutions being realized on a massive scale. And yeah, so for us, it's one, like doing the case monitoring, but then also it's looking and exploring different topics that can get our members thinking about how their work is impacted by human rights and impacts human rights.
So we should stop for a
Thanks
moment.
for that
and
answer.
see if you have
Thanks
another
for the
question.
membership perspective as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. I want to say hi to Dorothy and to Jessica. This is John Gardner. I'm long since retired, and I'm not actively a member of or working with an association. I am a member of and have a background in the statistics area, and particularly ethical issues regarding that. I'm wondering, I have a terrible habit, as Jessica knows very well, of bringing something in from left field that is not part of the discussion at a given point. But sometimes when I think it's important, somebody else comes to think, hey, maybe that is important too. I wonder about impacts individual scientific associations can have on a major problem of science generally. And that is basically the societal disconnect where we have large parts of the US and frankly the global society which have no respect for scientists, empirical research, factual information, or whatever. I've just discovered there's quite a large social science history of about 40 years of studying a topic they call authoritarianism. From my philosophy days, I look at it this way. There are two fundamental theories of knowledge. Empiricism and faith. Faith means that you decide there is an authority that you think is right and gives you good guidance. And so you organize your worldview in support of that authority, whether it be a religion or a person or a group. It really doesn't matter very much. The point is that you feel that you can go to some source that is authoritative, and it will give you guidance for the practical things you want to do in life. The dramatic alternative is empiricism, where you want to know factual information, and this comes up not only in science, but also in law, say forensics, in history, when you're trying to find out what really happened in a certain place and time and so forth, generally empiricism. And the social science works at trying to understand the mechanisms that people in the different camps use. And of particular interest to me now is for the people who reject empiricism and thereby reject science. It seems to me unlikely that there is no path to these people whatsoever. I think I know some of them, and I think I know that you can talk to them about some things, you can't talk to them about other things. And I'm wondering Certainly, I'm going to suggest to the American Statistical Association that we consider paying some attention, like featuring in conferences and so forth, some of the solid statistical work on authoritarianism, on the conflicts between science and anti-science, and ways of trying to ameliorate that disconnect. Now, my question for this group is there any interest, or do any of you see any possibility that any of you could encourage your scientific societies to take a look at this issue and to see whether or not there is some specific capability that your society could bring to this issue, because it affects all of science, and all of science affects human rights. So my question is there more that science can do to improve the disconnect between science and anti-science, and thereby help human rights through that process?
Oh, Dorothy, you're muted.
Thank you, John. That's very interesting. I don't think I have a quick answer for you, but I think from the standpoint that larger associations such as the American Chemical Society, we work at trying to improve people's lives, as we say, through their science. And we work in both with our members, and we work to advocate. We also have advocate for our members in what is going on at the federal level, so that we do spend time on Capitol Hill and try to get to an understanding and what's going on in bills and different new things that are coming up before the Senate, so that we can know how we should approach, how we can support that. So it's not always that clear, but I think our goal is to make sure that our members, not make sure, but to work towards what happens in our federal government, even in the state and local level, has a positive result for the members. We even have a chemistry caucus now in Washington, D.C. We work through that group. And the group that Lori's a part of, spends quite a bit of time. And the board of directors is there at least once a year, making sure that we talk directly to understand where the government is going, where bills are going, where funding is going. So I'm going to stop because I'm not sure I'm getting to your question, but I think that we try to be broader than just the scientific publication. We're trying to do more in the sense for our members. So that's what I was saying. I actually going to look over here to Tom. You might have a thought about that from the bigger picture.
No, Dorothy, thanks, and you're absolutely right. And John, this is a huge issue, and I can tell you that ACS and certainly AAAS are interested in this issue and doing what we can. Once a month, in fact, on Monday of this week, about 40 scientific societies meet via Zoom call, and we talked with the new head of NSF, Dr. Panchanathan, about issues related to science and people's confidence in science and vaccines and climate and all of these large issues. And we reach out to, in many cases, the general public we're celebrating this week National Chemistry Week. We try to explain the beneficial effect that chemistry has on people's lives. We reach out, as has been said, to policymakers. We hold briefings on Capitol Hill to explain science. In fact, we did one 2 years ago on the pandemic, and who would have thought that it would have been as relevant as quickly as it it has been. And maybe, John, the most frustrating part is that people who are set in their ways are very difficult to move on that. And so we spend an awful lot of time with our K through 12 education program before young people are fixed in their ways or in their beliefs. We do try to give them a strong basis in science that all citizens need to have, whether they're going to be chemists or whatever. They need to have this fundamental understanding and appreciation of science. And I would say what you mentioned is a huge problem. But if you take a look at who do people trust, scientists certainly rank well up toward the top of the list, certainly above politicians, for example, in terms of trustworthiness. We've got a ways to go, and I think we focus a lot on younger people, really, the children, young students, and try to give them a solid base. That'd be my thoughts.
I will just say thank you very much to both Dorothy and Tom, and I think your comments are very helpful in addressing the issue. The emphasis that I'm trying to encourage to add to what you're already doing is a clear understanding of the fundamental mental structures that underlie adult, not child, tendency to reject science simply because somebody they consider authoritative is something against science. I believe that it is possible to talk in such a way that you can reach those people on specific items, not on their general orientation or their respect for authority versus their respect for empiricism, but to understand the social science involved and the sort of the levers that are most useful in communicating to the people who are fundamentally anti-science, but nobody's one-dimensional. And for example, I would say an issue with regard to, say, pandemic policy is not to focus on the science in general, but to focus on their family, their loved ones, their community that may be somewhat endangered, and just approach it from the point of view of how might they like to better protect their family, their people, and not go at it from an already firm thing like masks or something that's already a firm political divide.
Yeah.
But try to structure our arguments in such a way that we get at values that they hold, that we share, that will not be stomped upon by their authoritarian tendencies.
So if I can just jump in here. So I think that the point that you're getting at, John, about trying to speak with people on their level is one that I think that ACS tries to keep in mind with a lot of our public messaging. So we have talked a lot about trying to get them early with developing an interest in STEM in terms of outreach to children, and we certainly have a whole division at ACS that's based around education. But we also do lots of other public outreach to try to engage people and get them interested in science in general and see and learn a little bit more about what our members do. So For example, one of our really popular and successful outreach efforts over the years has been a series of YouTube videos called ACS Reactions. And these are short 5 to 10 minute videos where we'll have an ACS member, or we'll have a few scientists talk about, take sort of like a normal, like standard topic, like say, why do avocados turn brown when they're cut open and sit out for a while? And you know, everybody knows that that happens, but you actually have scientists that will explain, oh, well, it's because of X, Y, and Z. I myself am not a chemist. I actually, I'm one of those social scientists you're talking about. I have a policy background, so I find those really engaging. And actually, it's been a great tool for us because, especially now in the pandemic, we've been able to do a series or several of our reactions videos based around, well, how do masks work? How would a face mask really protect, and what sorts of fabrics are better for that if you're making them at home versus trying to buy one at the store? So I think that, you know, for us, ACS is we're not a political organization. We can't endorse candidates. We try to work with all levels of government to try to make sure that there's scientific integrity and decision making and policy making with the U.S. government. And I think that when it comes to working with the public, you know, we try to do outreach to them on their level and get them interested in general with how our members are addressing not only why avocados turn brown, small thing maybe, but also bigger things about dealing with the pandemic, how vaccines are developed, talking about climate change and things like that. And so I think that, you know, at ACS, we're lucky because we're a very large organization. We've got lots of great scientists at our disposal that we're able to pull from a big pool of different members that can help us with this sort of outreach. But that's definitely, you know, thinking about how to work with the public and get them to understand and appreciate science is certainly one of our core values, is communicate chemistry's value. And we do that through many different ways. As Tom said, this week's National Chemistry Week, we've got lots of activities around that. We do a lot around Earth Week and things of that nature. So we've tried over many years to do public outreach to get them interested in general in science. And I think that we're lucky in that we've got a pretty solid brand that we're able to kind of be a trusted and reliable source for people going forward. At least I hope so.
Yes, and I agree in that it's totally admirable. I also very much agree with your point of staying out of politics, and that is kind of a key point which I didn't articulate very clearly. When we make the pro-science arguments, we want to do it in such a manner that it does not trigger political tripwires. And it may help to understand that if we understand the social science involved a little better and improve our own capability to tiptoe around the tripwires and make our points about the benefit of science in a manner that is appealing to people who don't necessarily automatically say science, oh, that's wonderful, but do it in such a manner that we emphasize values that they will agree with, even if their general approach to knowledge and life is different than empiricism.
So John, we thank you so much for that discussion and contribution to our discussion. So hopefully that was helpful in our responding. And I'm going to ask if there are any of our other, anyone else has questions coming back to the area of associations and human rights, science and human rights.
I know Tom has to go. Tom,
Yeah.
do you have to go right now?
In fact, I do. I've got my next Zoom teed up. I apologize. I thought this was only an hour long, but Jessica and Dorothy, Lori, many thanks for including me. I I enjoyed the discussion today and yesterday as well. And I'm sorry I need to sign off at this point.
That's okay,
Thank you
Tom.
for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
So I guess my question is for people who, individual scientists, members of scientific societies and or staff of those societies that would like to get their organizations more engaged in human rights, but are looking for what the right foothold is. What would you recommend, Dorothy and or Laurie?
For someone, an organization wanting to get started in this area of science.
Well, someone's wanting to get their organization started. They're not coming from the leadership. This is coming from within.
Yeah. And sometimes it's almost starting to become, I want to go towards symposium webinars is where I'm going towards with my thoughts. And for that organization to start to build, I mean, joining something like the coalition, I'm starting to look at an organization that is a cross spread and seeing what people are doing, what the other organizations are doing in there. I have to say that when I got elected to the, became a member of the board, before that, in 2014, I had not focused in this area of science and human rights. But once you start to realize the impact, wow, you know, it makes a difference. So I think it's actually, and I came in right when we had the coalition and you're able to do that. So I would say as an organization, they might want to, you know, they don't want to maybe get knee deep, really deep into a coalition, but they can start to observe what other people are doing and decide what's the strength, where can they begin to play in their organization. And then maybe it's setting up a webinar or symposium in their own organization and get started. So it's building connections, networking, moving slowly out, taking on a small amount and expanding, but understanding what you can do with your organization. And there's always some funding, you know? So what can you get funding to do? That's the first thought that could top of mind, Jessica. Lori, for you?
Yeah. Yeah. So I agree, Dorothy. I think that you touched on pretty much everything. Looking for, I guess, what the low-hanging fruit would be in terms of, you know, what the easy connections would be. So if you're an association that's solely academic, then looking at what sorts of human rights issues are specific to academics or your subsection of academics. If you have a mix of private sector and government and academia like ACS has, then seeing if there are some sort of cross sections that would be a little interdisciplinary that could be of interest to members. So I think yeah, starting there. And the thing is I imagine that most associations already kind of are involved in issues of human rights and maybe just don't realize it yet. And so I think that it's just familiarizing yourself with the language around human rights and science and figuring out what the best connection is for your particular group. And I mean, it always helps to have a couple of champions, a couple of really passionate people to drive a new initiative forward. So yeah, that would be my advice.
That's great.
So this is Ed Walsh from the Acoustical Society of America talking. I apologize, I got distracted with another obligation I have here, but this is a really important conversation as far as I'm concerned. So I've had the privilege of being associated with the coalition for a long time now, and but we've had some difficulty, you know, integrating into the Acoustical Society a really serious effort to get involved. And one of the questions I've always had is, to what extent do you guys think having like a support office is, an employee, a dedicated individual who kind of drives that effort forward within an organization? It just feels to me like most of the people who are doing such wonderful work in this area, like the ACS have dedicated staff that focus on the key issues. Do you think I'm right? I mean, is it really a critically important step if you really want to be serious about this to have a staff?
I think that it can help just for maybe some consistency, and also because like I think it can be hard if it's solely volunteer driven sometimes, just because like you don't necessarily have it tied with someone's objectives and that sort of thing. So I think it helps. I don't think it's 100% necessary, especially if you're a small association without a ton of resources. I think if you can get it added maybe to an existing staff person's portfolio, at least like, to do some of the organization around if there's a specific press release or setting up meetings or something like that, that's maybe a good way to get into it. But I think that more than anything, it's useful to have the leadership of the organization kind of bought in. So the fact that at ACS we have this sort of at the board of directors level, that really helps us to drive a lot of the work that we're able to do. I'm not super familiar with the setup of the Acoustical Society. Do you guys have full-time staff?
We a very limited staff, but there isn't anyone focused explicitly on this. I mean, we're one of the things, but of course, as you mentioned, resources is a key issue here when it comes to thinking about taking that step. And the one thing that we are attempting to do now is work through the AIP who has a venture program that might provide the resources for a part-time staff member, for example, or partnering with other organizations that are relatively small that would like to have a larger presence in this area but don't have the resources, and maybe partnering with them to bring a full-time person on and a part-time basis across a number of organizations. But again, I think that I know that I'm enthusiastic about doing this, but as I've said in many of these meetings, and I go back to the real world, and things can have a tendency to fall into the noise, unfortunately. So to me, it's always seemed to be a critical step, and one that we are pursuing now, and we're hoping that we'll have some success in working through this program at the AIP. But the leadership, if that was your question, the leadership is supportive as measured by the fact that they've continued to support our membership in the coalition.
Mm-hmm.
But I really do think and I report back to them on all the important and exciting things that are happening here. But having a presence, in an office, I think it just feels to me like that could be the real linchpin in terms of moving this to the level that we would like to move to.
I mean, I think that if you can come up with, or if you have a list of specific activities that you would want for that staff person to support, that can maybe help strengthen that.
Yep. Good suggestion.
To the leadership and the staff, because if it's one thing to say in general we want to be more involved, and then you can just get the tacit like, yeah, let's do more with it. But if you want to say do a symposium series, or if you want to like actually pursue casework on human rights cases, or whatever it may be, I think that maybe kind of coming up with like specific activities that would be tied to that position or the program that might be connected with in a portfolio of a staff member's work, that might help to make the case a little bit more. Dorothy, do you have any other?
I think you said it at the end, that having a staff person who has maybe some other responsibilities, but one of her responsibilities is the Science and Human Rights program. So you don't have to have a 100%. Lori and I work together. She's got other things going on, but apart, I think at one point it was more than it is now, your time with the Science and Human Rights program. But I think we've struck a pretty good medium now. So I think that getting started, you might want to start with someone that is part of there. And then as you need, and as you're able to see progress and things accomplishing, being accomplished to then increase that. I pull back, so stay a bit flexible. But I think having someone in the office who is a paid person, whose performance has some measure related to science and human rights, a performance review, makes a difference because they have to set certain goals.
No, I agree. Great suggestion. That's my feeling, is that I would simply like to have the human rights question a more permanent conversation going on within the office. And but great suggestions. I appreciate the narrative.
Within ACS, it's been, well, it's always been in my office, which is the global international offense, but it's kind of moved between being part of our membership section, and now I'm part of our government affairs section. So I would say that maybe, thinking about where it might be housed within your organization would be helpful too.
Yeah, so I chair the panel on public policy at the Acoustical Society, which is which is where ultimately we think about the home living. But again, we're looking for a person, a staff level person who might be able to, facilitate the activities on the panel and within the larger organization. So good suggestions, though. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? 20 minutes. We still have Amanda with us.
It's hard for me not to speak when there's a silence like this.
Okay.
I'll say something that's slightly outside the context of this. I've been associated with the coalition since it started, and a big supporter of it, although as an individual, never as a representative of my society. But one of the things that I noticed dramatically, particularly in the past year and particularly in the past 2 days, is both the substance and the quality of what's going on in this organization has increased tremendously over the past few years, and particularly after the past 2 or 3 years. So my heartiest congratulations to Jessica and everybody, and Teresa and everybody else associated with the staff. The quality of this conference is much higher than the standard conference that I get to go to. And you're doing a great job, and that has got to attract more attention and more support. So I just want to say congratulations and thank you.
Thanks very much, John. Well, it helps having the conference once a year so that we can really concentrate our efforts on that rather than splitting it across 2. But thank you, and I'll certainly pass it on to Teresa and the team. They're the ones who deserve the credit.
Yeah, this is I think we can really put forth a very good program on an annual basis. And last year had all the dynamics of being in person, but I think we kept a lot of it going virtual. So, you never miss that human contact, but this is pretty good. Well, the conference is very good, but I mean the contact networking. So we'll become experts in this, and we will wonder why we ever flew to go to conference. Actually, it facilitates. I have been in a few sessions of my church's meeting, which is being virtual, and it would have been in the summer, but because they couldn't figure out what to do, it got moved to the fall. So I was able to grab a couple of sessions. I never would have been able to be between New Jersey and Washington, D.C. and New Hampshire over this time period, but it does facilitate your moving around quite a bit. Okay.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Yeah. Thank you. I don't know if we'll stay on. Somebody may just, the best sale is at the last minute. So we can never leave our booths until the trade show closed, because they said the best sale would be like that last minute of the event. So we have to hang in there.
Good trick of the trade.
Yeah. Yeah. It was good to hear the new CEO of AAAS
Yeah.
yesterday. I hadn't paid attention. I have to admit, I knew somebody new. We've mentioned that, but it was the first time I had a visual of him.
Yeah. I mean, it's been quite the baptism by fire for him. But you got some insights into what he's been doing since he came on board. So the pandemic has not slowed him down. In fact, I kind of fear maybe what level of energy he would have if we were all there in person. But no, he's been a great addition to the team.
So he saw this as an opportunity born out of tragedy. That's very interesting way to put it.
Yeah.
So I think that's been a plus when John was talking about how much progress has been made. You've gotten even more commitment from like the CEO level in AAAS and involvement. And so that's made a difference too over these last few years to have that level.
Yeah, I mean, credit to Dr. Holt as well. He was
right. That's what I was thinking
of the work of the coalition.
Because he would actually, now that's one of the things we couldn't do this way. We didn't do the executive session, or did you do it?
No, we don't. We're going to hold that later. We decided not to hold either council or the executive director circle at the same time as the conference. It didn't make sense. So we will be scheduling that for about a month from now.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's good to kind of spread it out a little bit with these sorts of things.
And I'm hoping that we'll be able to get all the executive directors who aren't able to travel to DC actually together on a screen.
Right.
Well, it is now 3:46.
Okay, so shall we end this?
Probably should. We'll see each other over in the plenary.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jessica, Lori. And I still see Amanda's face and Marcy. John, thank you for coming. All right, very good. We'll join the plenary in a few minutes. So great. Have a good evening and thanks to you.
Thanks, Dorothy.
Mm-hmm.